right, so we are ready to start talking about organelles. And as we said, all organelles have those four structures of cytoplasm, cell membranes, ribosome, and some form of genetic material. So now we are focusing on the idea that our eukaryotic cells have something in addition to those four things. They have what we call membrane-bound organelles, and this word organelle means that they are specialized structures within the cell that work together to help make the cell function. So I like to think of them as little mini organs. So they are functioning within the cell. Sorry, it got hard to read here, but we think of them as mini organs within the cell working together for one main purpose: to make proteins. That is the actual function that we are trying to do. We've already seen that proteins essentially run our body, and so everything in your cells are essentially trying to help with that protein making process. All right, the first organelle we are talking about today is called the cell membrane. It can also be known as the plasma membrane. So there's lots of different things that we can call this structure, but in general, it is a structure that surrounds the outside of all of our cells. So again, this is something that we said is in all of our cell types, and it is made of two layers, and we call this the phospholipid bilayer. So in our last section, we learned what phospholipids are, and here we're going to see them in two layers. So this word bi here means two, so two layers of phospholipids. The job of our cell membrane is that it gets to control what goes in and out of the cell. So as we go through our notes on all of our different organelles, we're going to relate the cell membrane to some structure in the school as an analogy. And if we're using the school building as a whole, something that controls what goes in and out, but it's selectively doing this, would be like the doors. I have keys. I have access to different doors than what you do. And here we can see the structure of our cell membrane, or the phospholipid bilayer. So we know that it is made of two layers, as it is a bilayer, so it is made of two layers of fats, and these fats are specifically our phospholipids. So if we recall from the last section, we have our phosphate here at the top, and then our two fatty acid tails, which is the lipid portion. So they have a hydrophilic head, which is our phosphate group, and we have hydrophobic tails. So the hydrophobic portion does not like water. So if you look here, the tails are next to each other in this double membrane layer, and allowing the water inside your cells and outside your cells to stay where they're supposed to. We are still talking about the cell membrane, but we know that it has this phospholipid bilayer, but there are other things that are included throughout this layer. So the first thing is that we have is proteins, and they are embedded for transport. So you can see here in this middle section that we are moving things from one side of the cell across the cell. So it is transporting things through the cell using our proteins. Next, you can see that we also have carbohydrates that are embedded for structure. And so there are different carbs that are located throughout that we use for structural purposes. And then something we want to note before we move on is that we are calling the cell membrane also the fluid mosaic model, because it is composed of many parts that are all moving around freely. So if we recap, our cell membrane, that is one name for the structure. It can also be called the plasma membrane. That's two names for the structure. It is referred to as the phospholipid bilayer, as well as the fluid mosaic model. So that is four names, all referring to this one structure. So I'm sorry, it's the way it is. You do have to know all four names. I didn't come up with it. I am just telling you about it. All right, now we are on the cytoskeleton. And the cytoskeleton, if we look at its structure, it is made of thread-like fibers, And these fibers are typically made of proteins. And if we look over here at one of our pictures, you can see they're pointing to these little tiny fibrous threads floating around, but usually they're so small that they're not going to be pictured in a cell diagram. So what it is that they do for us is that they give the cells shape, and so they're used for like structural support. So they can also help our organelles move around. And so they're providing structural support for the animal cells who don't have a cell wall, so they don't have this big structure on the outside as support, so they're having the support come from within the cell. Now we are looking at the organelle referred to as cytoplasm, and cytoplasm in structure is a jelly-like substance, and it is mainly made up of water. So if you look at our pictures down here, you'll notice that they're pointing just kind of out into this open space and not actually directly at anything. And that is because its function is that it is holding everything else in place. So we can literally think of it like Jell-O. I like to think of it as Jell-O salad, you know, Jell-O that has some kind of fruit or something floating around in it. And that means that our cytoplasm is filling in all of these open spaces between all of our other organelles. And we want to note that cytoplasm is one of those 4 things that's found in all of our cell types. So we can see that it is here in our animal cells, it is found in our plant cells, as well as in our bacteria or our prokaryotes. Now we are ready for the nucleus, and you can see the little picture of what it looks like here. And the structure of the nucleus is that it contains our genetic material. So for us, that would be DNA. And so DNA is found in this little inside structure here. And it is surrounded by a nuclear envelope or membrane with pores that control what goes in and out. One reason why we have pores on this structure is that your DNA is so important, right? It makes you you, that we don't want things coming in that shouldn't be. So if we look at the function of the nucleus is to protect that DNA. It is precious, and so it's protecting the DNA that controls the activities of the cell. So if we go back to our analogy of using the school building, what is protecting the students? If we use that as our DNA, protection and controls all of the activities, that would be our principal, Mr. Kieswetter. And so you can see here that yes, we do have a nucleus in our animal cells. Yes, we do have a nucleus in our plant cells, but no, we do not have a nucleus in our prokaryotes. Now we are looking at something very similar, and that is the nucleolus. And you can see that we've added just these 2 letters here. And the nucleolus is a structure that is found inside the nucleus, which is why its name sounds so familiar. So this whole thing here is the nucleus, but this red circle on the inside is the nucleolus. So the job of the nucleolus is that it is making our RNA, which makes up our ribosomes. Our RNA is a form of genetic material that we will talk about later in the year, but we are turning our DNA into this structure, which is then going to make us ribosomes. So you can see that's in any cell that has just a regular nucleus. So we have it in our animals and our plants, but again, we don't have any nucleuses in our prokaryotic cells. Now we are ready to look at the ribosome, which is all of these little dots over here. So structurally, ribosomes are made of proteins and rRNA. So they're made of protein and genetic material. And they are located on the rough ER and floating in the cytoplasm. So they actually have 2 different spots. So you can see in our pictures, we have them just out here floating around, but we also have them on this structure here, which we will talk about. So you can see these little tiny bumps, and those are ribosomes. You can see them here as well. And their function is that they are making proteins. And I have a lot of exclamation points here because proteins, as we know, are very important. So this is a very big job that the ribosomes have. Now we are on to the rough ER, and ER stands for endoplasmic reticulum. I will always let you abbreviate it as just ER because nobody wants to spell that. So if we look at the structure of the rough ER, it has ribosomes on its surface. So if we look at our picture over here, you can see all of these bumps, and that's why it actually has the name of rough ER, because it looks bumpy. It also will always be hugging the nucleus. So you can see that I have included a picture of the nucleus as well as the rough ER, because they will always be right next to each other. And its function is that it is making proteins. And then it is also going to package those proteins for secretion. So if we think about our school analogy, I think that your teachers would be the rough ER. Proteins are the most important thing, just like your education, and your teachers are helping you make your education. And the last organelle that we are talking about today is similar in name. It is the smooth ER. Again, ER standing for endoplasmic reticulum. And this is called smooth because it does not have any ribosomes on its surface, which we can see over here that it is the one in the back here that is no ribosomes, no dots, so it is not bumpy. We call it the smooth ER. It is also then attached to our rough ER, so we have this same pattern of nucleus, rough ER, and then our smooth ER, and it'll always look like this. And it makes lipids, so they're making our membranes, like our phospholipids. And so we can see that we have our nucleus, rough ER, smooth ER in our animal cells, same for our plant cells, but again, we do not have these things in our prokaryotes.